There, I think that is better.
Yeah.
Welcome to we'll start again. Welcome to Fordham Road Collaborative and the Kushner Report. Just a few things, please keep yourselves muted until we get to the Q&A. The next thing is we decided to bypass the website. So those of you that are interested in the video recording, you can go straight to our YouTube account. And in fact, you might want to just spread the word about that. So the YouTube account will look like this. You can just type in Fordham Road Collaborative and you'll get to it. The URL is at the bottom. You don't need to worry about that exactly because we'll send that out to you. Dennis will send it out to you in an email. So you would just go directly to YouTube. And what's nice about that too is that you'll see that we've got the archive of all the previous Kushner reports for the past 2 years. So that'll be nice for you. And I think with that, there is one other thing. For November, we will be doing, it's Thanksgiving, so it's customary for us to do the following Thursday, which will be December 1st. So the November Kushner report will actually be on December 1st. And I think that's it, Dennis, so take it away.
Great. Okay, well, the morning, everybody, and welcome to the Kushner Report for October of 2022. This is the beginning of the fourth quarter of the year. And as you know, we completed the third quarter, the end of September, and we should start seeing some information coming out sometime early in November, just to get us an idea of what the GDP looked like from that standpoint. And I'll talk about that in a little while. So welcome to the report for October. You know that at the end of the presentation today, all of you will have an opportunity to participate in our question and answer session. So the agenda today will be to look at the key economic indicators, the global economy, the domestic economy, mergers and acquisitions, other significant economic news, and then what's ahead in 2022. And today our feature will be oil and gas market outlook for 2022 and 2023. And a colleague of mine, David Eddy, will be on in the Q&A and give us a few minutes on some additional views on the oil industry here affecting the United States per se. So as we begin to look at the oil and gas outlook, first of all, the petroleum industry is also known as the oil industry or the oil patch, and includes the global processes, if you will, of exploration, extraction, refining, transportation, often by tankers and pipelines, and then marketing of petroleum products. It's the largest volume of products in the industry are really fuel and gasoline, and many in Europe will call it petrol. So oil and natural gas systems really encompass the wells, gas gathering, processing facilities, storage and transmission, and also distribution pipelines. And the components are really all important aspects of the natural gas cycle. The process of getting natural gas, if you will, out of the ground and to the end users, natural gas systems really encompass the following 5 elements. One is production, and that is taking out the raw materials from underground formations, gathering and processing, transmission, and distribution. And in the oil industry, some underground crude contains natural gas that is entrained in the oil at really high reservoir pressures. Crude oil production, if you will, in our forecast averages about 11.8 million barrels a day in the United States for 2022. And as we move into 2023, we're looking at 12.6 million barrels a day. So we're seeing an increase for next year. And this will set a record for the United States for the most oil produced in 1 year in the United States next year. And oil and gas industry, as you know, is one of the largest sectors in the world in terms of dollar value. It generates an estimated $5 trillion a year in global revenue. And that's what the number was here in 2022. So despite the growth, if you will, crude oil production next year adjusted slightly lower than this year's forecast, a little bit lower based on capabilities. And production remains on track, if you will, to record records for next year. But output is expected an average rate next year. So we're really talking about from 840,000 barrels a day up to 860,000 barrels a day. So that's moving forward. That's the key. In the area when we look at electricity and coal and everything, economists really expect the U.S. sales of electricity to ultimate customers to rise by 2.6% this year. And mostly because of economic activity. And, as you know, we had a very hot summer. and that should hopefully drop down a little bit next year, but the fall is probably down about 0.4 of a point next year. But the largest increases in electricity generation in the forecast, it really comes from renewables sources, mostly solar and wind. And we expect renewable sources will provide 22% of US generation in this year and moving up to 24% next year. And in 2021, it was at 20%. So there's a continuation of growth taking place on an ongoing basis, which is good. And natural gas basically fuels, it's around 37% of US electricity generation this year, and that's going to fall a little bit to 36% next year. But economists basically are looking at residential price of electricity will average about 14.8 cents per kilowatt hour this year, and that's up from 7.5% that we saw last year. Now, when we talk about capital spending, which is critical to the industry, supply chain challenges really manifested themselves during the current year and during the pandemic. We saw a big slowdown in that area. Expenditures in 2020 were cut by 31%, which is very significant. And then we saw spending this year is up around 25%. So the level of investment still remains below historical averages. So we're going to need to see that increase going forward. And the profits exactly for the year should decline moderately, and spending will remain below COVID levels in next year as well. At OPEC, as you know, you're familiar with, recently a comment came out about them cutting production by 2 million barrels a day. And the intent there is they want to drive the price of oil up to $90 a barrel. The one thing that was not stated perfectly is the fact that we're talking about the current production levels by OPEC and Russia are a little bit below where they're supposed to be. The 2 million barrels next year is their forecast. They're not tacking down actual production. This is the forecasted number, which was somewhat misleading. And again, on a global basis, the petroleum supply disruptions, the concern is that if we have any continuations of supply disruptions from earthquakes or pandemics, etc., we'll see prices continue to escalate, and we may be fall behind on producing the oil that we expect to. Now, people want to know about the taping, etc., the strategic oil reserve. What is that? Well, the U.S. President Biden has rarely used potentially powerful tools to make energy shortages or economically damaged price strikes. However, this year, earlier in the year, we agreed to take out 180 million barrels from the oil reserve. And thus far, we've already gone through 165 million barrels. And recently, within the last 2 weeks, we're going to use the remaining 15 million barrels from the oil reserve. And that's because of critical concerns we have about the flow of oil throughout the system. So how much is really in the reserve being tapped? Well, first of all, I mentioned the 165 barrels, but in December of 2009, we had 727 million barrels in reserve for the country. And as of October 14th, not too long ago, we're down about 405 million barrels. And that includes the removal, if you will, of the 15 million barrels that we're talking about in October. So this basically, you're talking about having used up about 57% of the maximum capacity to date. So the alternatives are this. In 1965, the government passed a law that established reserves under that existing presidency, and that was to prevent and to deal with severe interruptions. Now, for those of you that had a car in the 1970s, you go back, I think it was 1971, 2 or 3, that we had to get gasoline at the pumps early in the morning, and it was odd and even. And that was real driver behind this, to have reserves so that does never happen again. So that's where we are. In the beginning of the tapped reserves took place during the former president administration, such as both Bushes, etc., have withdrawn barrels of oil based upon needs in the country. So what does a drawdown really encompass? Well, the drawdown basically is, it's about 4.4 million barrels a day to take it down through the web, and it takes about 13 days, if you will, to reach the open market. So what other countries do we think are out there that have their own oil reserves? Well, first of all, China, India, Japan, and South Korea are among Asia's largest stockpilers in the world, and there's about 106 million barrels out there in the United Kingdom. So other countries do have reserves set aside for hard times. So now let's take a look at what the key indicators are for the month. So first of all, I'm going to talk about the gross domestic product, inflation, unemployment at the federal level, the California level, and then of course the price per barrel of oil. So if you look at the indicators, the asterisks really indicate a change from last month's forecast in terms of what we see happening here. So if you look at global GDP for both this year and next year, it's 2.2% this year and dropping down to 1.5. And you know what that means is because there's a lot of concerns about recessions around the world. Now, the GDP forecast for this year is at 0.2%, and that's correct. The reason is this, Powell indicated that the concerns are, as we move into the fourth quarter, that we could see a further downturn in the economy slowing. So if you think about the first 6 months of the year, I believe it was around 2.6% negative GDP. And this morning, there's the stock market is up because there are thoughts that we could see positive GDP between 2.6 and 2.7% for the third quarter, which means it'll be almost zero growth for the first 9 months of the year. We'll have to see what happens in October, November, and December. And, you know, December's a big month because of Christmas and the other holidays. Now, inflation, as you know, the target for the end of the year is 8%. I'll talk more about that later. And then dropping down to 4.4% next year. And that's based on aggressive movement by the Federal Reserve on interest rates and hopefully improvements like in supply chain and other issues that are affecting inflation. And then that dropped down to 4.4. Now, the unemployment picture going out the end of this year is pretty good. It's at 3.6%. And in next year, going up to 4.2% based on concerns about recession. And if you look at California, which we kind of follow we're either the first to go into a recession, if you will, and then usually the last to come out of it. But unemployment is predicted this year around 4.4%, and then going out about 4.6 next year. The range on the oil remains the same. The other day, I think it's about $85 a barrel. We're still below. If you remember earlier this year and parts of last year, we were up over $130 a barrel. So hopefully we won't see that happen again. Now, looking at the global economy, I'd like to make a couple of brief comments. So first of all, inflation will continue to plague the global countries through 2022 and 2023, with the expectation that global countries will enter a recession sooner than the United States. And that's already starting in the United Kingdom, as well as some other countries in the European Common Market. Foreign currencies such as the euro, the pound, and the Chinese currencies will continue to underperform. And we'll see that, which is leading, if you will, to weaker currencies. The biggest concern in China really focuses on one, currency depreciation, the issues they have with real estate, and then finally lowered gross profit, GDP. Now, the Swiss National Bank had negative interest rates some time ago, but recently they've increased their interest rates by 75 basis points. And the Bank of England is concerned about a lot of issues in inflation. They just, on November the 3rd, they will raise their interest rates by 100 basis points. And their interest, if you will, or not their interest, but the inflation in the European Common Zone is around 10%. It's a little bit worse than ours. And the International Monetary Fund is saying that the global economic growth from 2023 to 2026 will decrease by $4 trillion. And that's pretty significant. And of course, the Reserve Bank of Australia raised basis points by 25 basis points in October. And their rate right now is around 2.60. And then like I said, there's an impending slowdown in the United Kingdom. The evidence is that they've had negative GDP of 3% month over month, primarily in the services area. And OPEC, as I mentioned earlier about the issues there, the real key, we call it OPEC in Russia, or some people call OPEC Plus, is to get the target dollar of $90 a barrel. And people want to know if the information is accurate. Well, we'll wait and see what happens. So now let's take a look at the domestic economy. Brief comment on this right now. So inflation will continue to plague the United States economy over the next couple of years before we see significant improvement. And the dollar will continue to strengthen in the months ahead. And economists expect to see interest rates continue to rise to somewhere between 4.25% and 5% in the coming months as we enter 2023. As you know, the Federal Open Market Committee meets on the 3rd and 4th of November. Expectations are we'll see the rates go up by 75 basis points, and there are expectations that we'll see 50 basis points rise in the month of December. So that's 125 more basis points before we hit January of 2023. They're also predicting, again, this is one area, they're predicting a mild recession in 2023. It's a question of whether it's going to be first, second, or third quarter of the year, but there's clearly movement toward a recession. Many feel it'll be a mild recession, but we'll just have to wait and see what the impact is. In the U.S. venture capital market, which is a big deal for companies getting funding and being able to go public or being sold, it's been very weak since the second quarter this year. And recently, we saw that only $43 billion was invested across all stages of that, which is significantly low. So we're seeing that now. And then in the third quarter, for example, we talked about possibly $14 billion. So that's pretty low given what's taken place over the last 10 or 12 years. Now, in terms of wholesale prices, and you know what those are, basically we're looking here that the prices and the increase went up by 0.4 of a point, and that's going to continue, which impacts the end user, which it goes to a supermarket or retail store, and then the prices go up there that affect all of us on this call. If you look at U.S. construction spending, it's dropped again more than expected. It's down 0.7 of a point. It's down almost 3 months in a row. We've seen a decrease in spending. Now, looking ahead, inflation, which is on everyone's mind right now. So core inflation, if you will, has risen to a 40-year high. And therefore, again, the Federal Reserve is going to take more aggressive action. The interest rate this month, if you believe this, the inflation for the month was 8.2%. That's down 8.3. So can they get to 8% or lower than that by the end of the year? We'll have to wait and see. If you look at the core inflation, it was up to 6.6%. And that excludes food and energy prices. So we'll see what happens. And then if we look, good news is Social Security benefits based on the cost of living allowance, if you will, is going to go up 8.7% next year, beginning in January. And that's the highest increase in 40 years. Now, when we look at trade exports, good news here, they're up to $330 billion in the month of August. And that's good. It's up 20%. So that's encouraging for us. And if we look at the trade deficit, even more good news, it dropped down to $67.4 billion in August. Go back over the last several months of doing this program, it was up to $80 and $90 billion a month. So this is very good news for our economy. Retail sales for the month of September were relatively flat, and expectations are we hope to see that beginning to rise as we start moving towards the Christmas and other holidays later this year in November and December. Hopefully we'll see some improvement in that area. So now we want to take a look at the job marketplace. So on a national basis in September, we saw 262,000 jobs created, and the unemployment rate dropped to 3.5%, down from 3.7. So if you look at a couple of the sectors here, you know, business and professional services have been very strong for at least the last 15 or 16 quarters and months, if you will. You saw a negative here. The government reduced jobs by 25,000. We saw a decrease of 8,000 in financial services. Now, if you look at health and education and leisure and hospitality, those are the ones that really took it strongly in terms of the COVID and the pandemic occurring. They're coming back strong now, which is good in terms of the economy. The biggest concern the Federal Reserve has, you see that number of 262? That number is still too high in terms of what they want to do, and they're going to continue to raise interest rates to get that down. And that's where we'll see. No one knows when that's going to cross over and break it down even lower than that. There are some expecting that we should see negative growth between 100 and 170,000 jobs a month sometime in 2023. And again, this is all speculation right now. Then, okay, the next slide. So now if we look at the California economy, it was somewhat anemic last month. Only 8,700 jobs were filled, and that's 6% lower than February of 2020. And unemployment decreased to 3.9%, down from the 4.1. Still a big concern about the lack of truck drivers moving products, and also production and distribution of oil in California. The only thing of significance here was the fact that in government, it was down to 16,100 jobs were eliminated during the month. Everything else was somewhat minor. So that's kind of where we stand on that. So let's take a look at some of the other economic indicators. So first of all, inflation, as I said earlier, interest rates, the inflation came in at 8.2% this month, and it's just they're going to continue to take aggressive action, as well as the core inflation of 6.6, still too high. And the good news is the labor market is still resilient. Unemployment has dropped to the lowest level in 50 years, so that's pretty strong right now, which is good news. And again, we'll see the basis points move up probably sometime next week, the week after. One of the concerns we have is as demand in the marketplace changes, companies have already began to freeze hiring and beginning to have layoffs. And many economists believe that 2023 is going to be a tough year. Now, if we look at mortgage rates, interesting thing here, mortgage rates and the applications, if you will, dropped to a 25-year low. And we'll see more of that. I'm going to talk more about in a few minutes when I get into the housing market. Manufacturing index dropped again to 50.9%. The concern we have is, if you remember several months ago, we were below 50. 50 is the target number. When we drop below 50, it says we're one of two things. We're either going into a recession or we're already in a recession. So that is one indicator that we have to watch very carefully in the months ahead. And of course, U.S. factory orders, again, were flat in August. So we've seen them flat for the last 2 to 3 months. And that was led by reductions, if you will, in new durable goods. Orders decreased. And in that area, and transportation equipment had 2 months where things were flat or declining. The consumer confidence, if you will, increased a little bit. It was up to 108 over the 103, which is very good for us. And on the other side, the small confidence level, in terms of small business, there's a lot of concerns. The index right now is at 92.1. And if you look at the 48-year average to be successful, you've got to be over 98. So we're still below that number, and we'll see what happens next month. Crude oil price, I mentioned last night, the last time I looked, it was at $84.88 a barrel, relatively flat from the last month. And hopefully we'll see that continue to flatten out or maybe even reduce going forward. Now we look at the housing market. So housing starts in October were 8% lower than August of this year. So they continue to drop. And the new home sales in October, sales were down across the country by 2.5% in August. This is 30.2% lower than September of 2021. Now, if we take a look at Southern California, in Los Angeles, the median house prices, if you will, were up 4.3% to about $892,000, and sales were up by 2.4% in September. Good month in the LA County area. But if you look at last year, we were down 31.7% over September of 2021. You can see the change in the market. And in Orange County, the median price of $1.2 million remained relatively the same. August sales were dropped by 5.8%. And if you look at sales, that's down 30.5% from September of 2021. And in San Diego, the median price was relatively unchanged. Sales were about 1.6%, but sales were down by 9.5%, which is 31% lower than last year. So the market is still out there. It's tougher, and we'll see what happens going forward. Again, existing home sales, dropped to a 10-year low. And based on that, it's based on the increase in the mortgage payments going forward. And we'll see what happens there. And again, during this time frame, 66,000 transactions fell out of escrow in the month of September. The productivity index that I normally have is done on a quarterly basis. I'm hoping we'll have information in November for the third quarter of this year. Now, company displacements for many months, it's been very strong where we haven't had any companies at all reporting anything of significance. You can see things are changing right now. So we had a number of companies that I'll report on. Usually those that are over 1,000 employees, I'll take a look at. So Stanley Black & Decker eliminated 1,000 jobs. Global Foundries Fiscal, which used to belong to IBM, 1,000. Amgen in the biotech area, 1,100. Opal, which is in the auto industry, 1,100. Power Home Solar, 1,100. Walmart, about 1,500 jobs. Johnson & Johnson, 1,200. Microsoft, 1,000. International Distribution Services, 10,000. For those of you familiar with Intel, that's 12,000 jobs last week. And then we have Siemens of 2,900. So you're starting to see this thing trickling down. I think the first step with many of the larger corporations is based on freezing hiring and seeing how far that'll go before they have to make other changes. Then let's take a look now at mergers and acquisitions. So keep in mind that the interest rates are still fairly low. Back in the old days when I was doing a lot of work, we saw 9–10% interest rates for making deals, and it's still pretty low as we speak. Keep in mind that organic growth in general across all sectors is still relatively flat, not a lot of growth. So you're going to see more M&A activity taking place going forward. We had only 4 key items this month. One was Adobe, which has been doing a lot of deals over the last few years, is acquiring a company called Figma. And Figma is a web-first collaborative design platform. And what that'll do is it'll expand the areas of web and mobile development techniques with screens and everything else going forward. So that's a $20 billion deal. Defense contractor L3Harris is buying Viasat, one of Viasat's unit. They're a San Diego-based company. They're here in Carlsbad for $2 billion roughly. And that deal is supposed to close probably by mid next year. And the idea is that L3 wants to expand, if you will, and better align their defense spending in areas of cybersecurity. South Korea took an active role. Navier, if you will, is buying a U.S. company called Postman. And basically, this company is primarily has a search engine, an e-commerce platform, and other services that take place around the country. The idea is here they want to use Postman to expand their international business across all different sectors in the world economy. So that's the first move by a South Korean company in some time. Here's the biggest concern we have right now, and that is Kroger is looking to buy its rival, Albertsons. You know, Albertsons owns like Vons, etc., and then you have Kroger, which owns Ralph's. What happens if this deal goes through, it's $24.6 billion. It's going to be hard to find any other independent grocery outlets. So what's being said now is this, that the combined Kroger and Albertsons will employ more than 700,000 employees across 5,000 stores. And if you combine this, you know, you're looking at the size here. So, you know, Kroger basically is behind Walmart and Albertsons is fourth, and then that's after Costco. Those are the major players in that marketplace. So I heard this morning that there's concern the Justice Department, et cetera, will take a look at this and see where there's a violation of antitrust or monopoly. So, you know, it's going to take time before this happens. So we'll see where that goes. So what else is significant taking place in our economy these days? Well, Hertz, as you know, when we went into the pandemic, sold more than 60–70% of their inventory of vehicles to keep the company alive with cash flow. They're now going to buy 175 electric vehicles from General Motors. And we're looking at here primarily, you know, you're talking about Chevrolets, Buicks, GMC, and Cadillac. So that's what the target market is. And they'll start having those cars beginning to come in early in January of next year. Ford Motor Company is active again. They're going to construct a $5.6 billion electric truck factory, and that's going to be located in Tennessee. And they're looking at hiring 6,000 people. So that'll be great when the deal is done, probably sometime early 2025. Apple, which has been talked about continually about where they do their manufacturing. So what they're going to do going forward, so the iPhone 14, et cetera, Apple is going to shift manufacturing from China to India. And the new technologies, if you will improve safety and security capabilities significantly. And India is the world's second largest smartphone market in the world. This is a good thing for Californians. There's a new law that's going to affect. It's called the Job Listings Law. And what is happening is that any company that has more than 15 employees will now be required to list salary ranges in all positions under the new law. This brings California in line with many of the other states around the United States. So, for example, if Sid was looking at a job and he wants to know what the range is, does he qualify? And it's between X and Y, at least he'll know about it. And does he fall in that area where they'll consider him for the position? So I think that's good for the people looking to make changes in jobs where they just send in my dollar value. You never know whether they'll call you. So I think this is good for people in the marketplace. Now, for those of you that use Facebook, there were over 1 million users, accounts were impacted. So you saw stolen usernames and passwords, etc. And that was a notification over 1 million. And this is affecting a lot of people with malicious code, if you will, that have Apple devices as well as other devices that they use. So we'll see where this goes. So they're going to have to come out with more details about what's going to take place here. And then we look at other things that are going on. The good news is Toys R Us, which went away in 2017, they went Chapter 7, full liquidation. They're coming back, and they're going to be in 41 Macy's locations ahead of the season for the fall, which is good news. So you'll see more toys available for little people around the country. So they're coming back, and you'll see that happening even starting in November. So this is good news from that perspective. And then you have BMW, which is going to do a $1.7 billion electric vehicle investment in their South Carolina operations back east, and that'll create some jobs for at least another 300 people. I mentioned earlier mortgage applications, and we have some folks on the call today that are in the real estate industry and some work in the area of mortgages. So, you know, the mortgage demand continues to go down. The trend continues on. It's now the lowest level in 25 years, according to the Mortgage Bankers Association. So you have depositories such as JP Morgan, Chase, Wells Fargo, and Bank of America are all experiencing double-digit contractions in producing loans in the third quarter, and that's going to continue for the time being. So we'll see where that goes going forward. So with that in mind, I'd like to open it up with Q&A, and what I'd like to do for a couple of minutes is David, who's an expert in the oil industry here. David is going to shed some light in terms of what we talked about earlier. So David, where are you?
I'm here.
Okay, David.